Hi everyone, it's me, Arden Lee, and as some of you may know, I am the creator of the Repatterning Project, which is an 8-week course that is about understanding and learning to program our human operating system, right? All the things that we learn over time. How can we identify those imprints, choose which ones we want to keep, which are serving us, and look at the ones that are not and repattern those in order to unlock creative freedom. And today what I want to talk about in this video is the idea of our patterns versus our personalities. And especially I want to look at what we think of as personality disorders, or so they are called by our current iteration of the mental health industry. And I want to look at why I believe so deeply that the model we're dealing with in the current iteration of the mental health industry is outdated and obsolete, even to the point of being harmful. So before I dive into that, I should probably let everyone know that I do have a round of the Repatterning Project coming up on July 10th. So that's this Sunday that we start. And you can certainly look in the description of the video where I'll put some information about it if you're interested in joining. It's a process that I feel really deeply passionate about and have seen dozens and dozens of individuals at this point go through this process and make incredible changes. Just amazing, amazing transformations to their lives, creating more happiness, more groundedness, more self-awareness, more self-trust, greater discernment, and greater freedom. Indeed, greater ability to tune into the things that they want to create in their lives, and then learn how to install the patterns that would be necessary in order to achieve those results, right? So I'm very passionate about this process. And if you're interested in it, if you've been following these videos for a while, or I don't know, maybe you just found this one, but you're like, that sounds awesome, sign me up. Look in the description, you know where to find me, just write me a message and we'll chat about that. Again, that's starting on July 10th, and we do it every summer and every winter. So just wanted to mention that before I move on. All right, so personality. Personality in general is something that, if I were to define it, I would say it's the overall image. It's the overall sort of perception of who a person is, right? The way that I might perceive someone, the way that they might perceive me, that sort of overall picture, right? But that picture is comprised of beliefs, values, behaviors, strategies, patterns that I know can be adapted and changed at will. I just said at will, and I'm sort of like, well, yeah, it's a little tough at first, right? The first time you really try to adapt a deeply held, deeply rooted belief, it feels, trust me, I speak from experience, it feels incredibly difficult, incredibly disorienting sometimes, but it can be done. And the more that I teach people how to do it, and the more they do it successfully, the more and more I believe that, and the more and more also the better we get at doing it, right? It is an iterative process by which the more we repattern, the better we get at repatterning, right? So I know this to be true, that what we think of as personality is almost like a mosaic, right? Almost like an overall picture that forms, almost like, like pointillism, that is made up of all of these different components. And I'm very interested in figuring out how to differentiate our human hardware from our human software. I'm very, very interested in this. What are the things that make me so very much that that I would not be able to change them, right? That I really wouldn't be able to, they are built into the system, right? whether it's in my body or it's in my soul, you know, whatever you want to call that. What are the things that I really cannot change about myself? Couple things come to mind. In recent years, I've discovered that I'm autistic and I also have ADHD. And because autism is a condition whereby I have an excess amount of neural pathways in my brain. This is the latest research that I'm aware of on autism, right? Autism is basically caused by an overabundance of neurological connections. And this tracks with me. I feel like I can feel them all in there most days. So that feels correct to me. And ADHD is characterized in part, at least, by a dopamine deficiency, right? So that is a chemical deficiency in my brain. So we have two things there that are definitely hardware, right? We have a chemical deficiency on one hand, and we have an overabundance of neurological connections, right? Those are things that are inherent to my physicality. I highly doubt that I would be able to change those, although I can certainly pattern myself to do more things that give me dopamine, right? I can try and train my brain into that. That'd probably be another video, right? But I'm very interested, basically, in figuring out what is hardware versus what is software. And what I see in a lot of mental health treatment is that people are treating software like it's hardware. And I can tell them for a fact that is software. that is, they have not gotten to the root of it yet. A book that I was reading recently, which really firmed up more of my beliefs on this subject, is The Way of the Psychonaut. I brought this out in a couple videos ago too. This was assigned to me as homework by my teacher, Grant Morrison. And indeed, as I was speaking about the personality the other day, the idea that the personality is comprised of these beliefs, values, strategies, behaviors, patterns, etc., that are adaptable. Someone said, "Oh, that's a very Morrison-like view," and that's very true. And I certainly owe a lot to Grant's mentorship, but also, these were things that started for me, that I started noticing before my mentorship with Grant began, and which I put into the repatterning project following my own awakening via these processes. And now I'm also discovering them, in other places as well. So I have a real firm and passionate belief that this method of understanding ourselves is the next step toward creating a model of mental health that actually supports and sustains our well-being effectively. So anyway, let me just read briefly from Way of the Psychonaut. Stanislav Grof basically identifies something that to me rang true, which I've called a pattern, but I'll go ahead and read what he says here, right? He says that emotionally relevant memories are not stored in the unconscious as a mosaic of isolated imprints, but in the form of complex dynamic constellations. And he gives this a name. He calls it a coax. He says, "I have coined for these memory aggregates the name Coax Systems, which is short for Systems of Condensed Experience. A coax system consists of emotionally charged memories from different periods of our lives that resemble each other in the quality of emotions or physical sensations that they share. Each coax has a basic theme that permeates all of its layers and represents their common denominator. The individual layers then contain variations on this basic theme that occurred at different periods of the person's life. The unconscious of a particular individual can contain several major coax constellations." I would say they contain many, many of them. "Their number, intensity, and the nature of the central themes varies considerably person to person. The layers of a particular system can, for example, contain all the major memories of humiliating, degrading, and shaming experiences that have damaged our self-esteem. In another Coax system, the common denominator can be anxiety experienced in various shocking and terrifying situations, or claustrophobic and suffocating feelings evoked by oppressive and confining circumstances. Rejection and emotional deprivation, damaging the ability to trust men, women, or people in general, is another common motif. Situations that have generated profound feelings of guilt and a sense of failure. Events that have resulted in a conviction that sex is dangerous or disgusting, and encounters with aggression and violence can be added to the above list as characteristic examples. Particularly important are Coax systems that contain memories of encounters with situations endangering life, health, and the integrity of the body. And he goes on to say also, in addition to negative constellations, there are also those that comprise memories of very pleasant or even ecstatic events. Memories of loving and fulfilling relationships, episodes of harmony in the family, stays in beautiful natural settings, major accomplishments and achievements, and so on, etc. I read that and I was like, wow, that really rings true for me. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I explain it, right? So in the repatterning project, what I teach is that our mind-body systems are a little bit like computers, right? We are always learning from our environment. We are always reaching out and then seeing, observing what happens in response. And we do this mostly unconsciously. Some of this might be conscious. We might, we might go out on a date and have a bad date and come back and say, I'm never dating again, right? Well, that would be us like declaring, I have reached out, I've done a thing, and I learned that it was a bad experience. I'm not doing that again, right? And then chances are, next week we'll we'll go back on that, right? But it's this idea that from birth, and arguably, actually, and Stanislav Grof would certainly argue earlier, at least from birth. I would also argue earlier too, but even if we only start at birth, it still tracks. We are constantly interacting with our environments and learning things about the world that then go on to comprise those values, beliefs, behaviors, strategies, patterns that comprise our personalities, right? So if our personality is the picture that emerges from a mosaic of all these little coexes or patterns, those can be changed. I know it, I've done it, I've seen other people do it, I've taught other people how to do it. And what happens basically, how these get formed is we have a trauma or event that happens, right? And let's go back to like when we're babies, because we're particularly impressionable way back then, right? And let's say that you have a baby who's like, I'm hungry, I have a need that I need to be met, and I can't feed myself, so the only thing I know how to do is cry, right? And that baby might experience, when I cry, like when I reach out, what response comes back? Well, maybe I'm fed, great, then I'm gonna feel like I'm safe to state my needs, right? Maybe I'm gonna get ignored, and then I learn, well, crying doesn't really do anything, so I might as well just sit here and wait for someone to take care of me. Or that baby might be punished. I was one of those babies, apparently, right? My mom told me years and years later when I was an adult that my father had once beaten me as a baby, literally like a baby, that he had hit me for crying. So, which explains a lot about my ability to ask to have my needs met. Like, wow, right in the beginning, just nope, that was nope, not doing that again, right? And then of course, like my conscious memory doesn't remember any of that, but I grow up and sure enough, one of the things that is most difficult for me in my interpersonal relationships is asking to have my needs met. I've got a lot better at it since all of this, but sure enough, that's one of the characteristics that I carried. And so when this trauma or event happens, our mind-body system forms what I called an internal algorithm, right? If X, then Y, right? If X, then Y. If I ask for my needs to be met, I'm gonna get my ass beat, literally, if you're me, right? So from that, the way that our brains process information and stores memory the way that our memory processing happens, and the way that confirmation bias colors our worldview, right, means that we are more and more likely to see evidence that confirms that our belief that our internal algorithm is correct. Oh, see, I did that and it happened again. I did that and it happened again. I did it and it happened again, right? And that snowballs over time, because the more something is familiar, the more evidence we will see of it in the world, because the way that our brains process information and store our memories, our brains recognize that which is familiar. And so the more we see evidence of the thing that we believe anyway, and then the more evidence we see of it and notice consciously, or unconsciously, then the more we believe that. And the more we believe it, the more we see evidence of it, the more evidence that we see of it, the more we believe it. And that's why at some point in our adult lives, these things that we think of as our personality tend to become things that appear to be pretty deeply rooted in, right? People also say that neuroplasticity tends to drop off after age 25. Well, I'd like to challenge that, actually. I understand that that may be typical, but what if it's not so much that our brains are no longer good at learning new things after we're 25? And what if it's more that we have a computer system, a mind-body system, that is pretty full of apps, that is pretty full of software, and doesn't have additional room? Whereas if we were to go through and actually examine the beliefs, values, behaviors, strategies, and patterns that we have taken on through our experiential interactions with the world at large around us, well, we might actually be able to toss some of those old patterns and put new ones in their place, right? And one of the things that that Groff doesn't really teach is he does teach how to like go back and figure out where these coexes are, like what is the common theme of this coex? Can we go back to one of the original instances where this was happening and bring it up and make it conscious? Because once you've made it conscious, then oftentimes that heals, right? That work is necessary to the next step, right? It's yes, of course we want to bring something up. We want to shine a light on it so that we can see, oh, wait a minute, this isn't me. This is not my personality. This is something that I learned. And if I had been placed in a different situation, if I had instead had a father who heard his daughter crying from her crib and was like, oh, let me see what's wrong, maybe she needs something. Who knows? Maybe I would have been very, very different in my adult life. In my relationships, maybe it would have been easier for me to ask to have my needs met, right? Again, I'm really interested in separating the hardware from the software, right? That's not my hardware, that's my software. I just happen to have been programmed with that software pretty early on, so it takes a pretty deep repatterning for me to get accustomed to doing things the other way, right? And I'm very happy to say that I've made immense progress in that regard. So, because it is possible, right? Because it really is possible to change. Another thing, as we heard, Groff was basically mentioning how we tend to think of most coexes as being negative, and that's in part because, well, if we have a positive coex or a positive pattern, we don't need to bring that into the mental health industry in order to fix it, right? That is already working for us. But he is right that those positive patterns exist. And I'm interested in those too. I'm interested in us learning how to install those. How do we look for and create situations that can imprint us, sometimes perhaps as strongly as our trauma, so that we can install the patterns, values, beliefs, behaviors, strategies, etc., that actually lead to the results that we want, right? How do we give ourselves the software that is going to result in our being the healthiest and happiest and most thriving versions of ourselves, even amidst all of the systemic oppression that is out there, right? And I would say especially because of the systemic oppression that is out there, because, you know, because it's go time, right? Because our nation is falling apart, right? Many of our global systems are falling apart. And so we need as many people who are healthy and happy and awake as possible. Awake. I hate using that after the Trump eras. It's such a I hate using that word now because it's come to mean, you know, the opposite. But people who are self-aware and community aware and system aware, right? Who can bring their gifts and their skill sets, which they have now installed patterns to be able to support, in order to change the larger destructive forces that are at play, right? So this is how we are able to shift ourselves, to shift what we think of as our personalities, and not that we're not great, but that we can give ourselves the values and strategies that actually reflect our best selves, right? So that we can equip ourselves to deal with this world that is falling apart, and hopefully be able to turn the tide and to make things better, right? So that I would say is like some of the bulk of my work, right? That is what I'm interested in doing and helping individuals to do, and hopefully by helping individuals to also help the collective at large. Meanwhile, over in our mental health industrial complex, we have the DSM-5, and I'm going to read a very quick passage from Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, about what Bessel van der Kolk thinks about the systems that we have in the DSM-5. In fact, I turned to this page with this quote is on, and the heading right here is the DSM-5, a veritable smorgasbord of, quote, diagnoses. And he does put that in quotes, right? Basically, the DSM-5, published in May 2013, came out with all these different labels for what it thinks of as personality disorders, which Bessel van der Kolk says these are actually associated with early life traumas. These are actually not about the person's personality as in anything that is inherent to them, but instead it's a natural response to the trauma in their environment, right? Including some new ones such as disruptive mood regulation disorder, non-suicidal self-injury, intermittent explosive disorder. Oh my God, you can literally be an IED. Look at that. Dysregulated social engagement disorder, disruptive impulse control disorder. Whew. And he says, with the DSM-5, psychiatry firmly regressed to early 19th century medical practice, despite the fact that we know that the origin of many of the problems it identifies, its diagnoses, describe surface phenomena that completely ignore the underlying causes. And that certainly was true in my experience. It's been over a decade, I think, since I sought, not quite over a decade, but close to a decade since I sought any kind of help from what we think of as the standard mental health industry. And so it's been some years, but in my experience, it failed me. It definitely failed me. It didn't do anything for me that I was ultimately able to do for myself with enough research into understanding what makes us behave the way that we behave and feel the way we feel and act the way we act, etc. And this view of the DSM is so prevalent still that it got brought up fairly recently in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. And I'm a little loath to comment on it because, man, what a circus tent in so many ways. But I was very interested in the testimony of Dr. Shannon Curry, who was a witness on behalf of the Depp team, who spoke about her belief that that Amber Heard has narcissistic personality disorder. And I'm also not defending Amber Heard or her actions. I don't know her well enough to do so, and from what I have heard and seen of her, she doesn't look like she looks like she could use a lot of work, right? I'm not in any way denying that that she quite likely has some poor patterns, and that Johnny Depp does too. I wish both of them healing. We'll see if they do it. But Shannon Curry got on the stand, and to millions of viewers across America, she articulated as best she could the standard model that the mental health industry practices today in terms of talking about these issues and calling them personality disorders. And here is what she said. I actually wrote this quote down from her testimony because I was so angry about it. She said, "A personality is the traits, the characteristics, the way we think, feel, act that make us who we are. And these traits are pretty stable over time and across situations. We might mind our P's and Q's if we meet someone new, but if somebody were to describe us or we were to describe ourselves, we have a pretty good sense of who we are. A personality disorder is some sort of dysfunction in those enduring traits, as opposed to other types of mental illness when you think of something like depression, which comes and goes." So basically what Shannon Curry, who got to go on national television representing the mental health industry and its current model, what she believes a personality is a set of enduring traits that are stable across time, over time, and across situations. I'm gonna go on a limb here and say this woman has likely never done ayahuasca. But ayahuasca is really just one way, right? I have sat with ayahuasca. It was very instrumental to my own path, but also the majority of what I learned is I didn't need ayahuasca to show me the research, right? Ayahuasca was helpful in my putting together the research that I was doing and synthesizing it into a cohesive picture and seeing how it also applied to me. But yeah, all of this information is available already, and somehow the mental health industry is still putting these labels on people. Oh, well, you have this personality disorder. And what does that do to a person? I can tell you what it did to me. The mental health industry was never quite comfortable giving me a borderline personality disorder diagnosis, but my then boyfriend certainly was. And I went and I inquired about this, and I sat there through a psychological evaluation, and they did not have anything conclusive for me. And do you know why? Because I started asking some of the tough questions. I said, I went and I looked up borderline personality disorder because if it's true that I have this thing, then, I want to look into that and I want to know how to treat it. But the thing is, feeling like the world is a dangerous place for me to be in feels like a very logical conclusion to me, given my experiences. Feeling like I, idealize a person and then very quickly they fall from that pedestal. Well, yeah, people keep betraying me. I don't think that is my fault. Maybe I'm too naive. Maybe I'm not discerning. And again, I was an undiagnosed autistic female, which means that being gullible and taking things at face value or assuming that people are not going to hurt you is a characteristic of that, right? And being gullible, quote unquote, right? I want to make sure I'm being mindful of the way that I speak. But many autistic femmes have come forward and basically said, yeah, I got really taken advantage of in my younger years until I realized what was going on. And that was certainly true for me. And when those betrayals would happen, well then, yeah, that person would come off the pedestal. You just freaking betrayed me, of course. To my mind, all that was very logical. So I was explaining that. And the team of these two psychological evaluators who were sitting there in some some office in Pennsylvania, you know, which is where my parents lived at the time. I was home visiting them and they were taking me in for treatment. They stared at me like I had 3 heads. Like I had just beamed myself down from my spaceship onto their couch, and they had no answers for me. And I'm angry about that because those answers were actually there in everything that I was saying. All of these things feel reasonable to me given my history, given my experiences, given the experiences I grew up with, given what I have known of the world so far. I think it is reasonable that I have drawn these conclusions that you are listing as symptoms. That's what I said in so many words. So I'd just like to invite everyone into what I believe, what I know to be a better model of thinking about what we think of as our personalities. And that even though it can be hard to break out of those patterns because they really do become calcified, right? Again, the more familiar that a pattern is in our own mind, the more that internal algorithm has rooted in, then yeah, the more we are going to see evidence of that, and the more we're going to believe it. And then the more we believe it, the more evidence we see of it, right? Because there's a whole world out there, but our brains process information at 8 billion bits per second, and we remember the parts that feel familiar to us, right? So as a result of that, of course, we see more and more that affirms our worldview, and our worldview gets rooted in. So I'm not saying that it's not difficult to start untangling all of that. It is very, very touchy and very sacred work, but it's possible. And to have someone who apparently represents the best that the mental health industrial complex can do at this point, get up in front of millions and millions of TV viewers and say the personality is a set of stable, enduring traits is wrong. It's wrong and it's harmful. So, that's my view on that. Just know that, you know, there's people like me and people like Stanislav Grof and lots of other people out there doing this work of deep transformation. And it is possible. It is very possible. And we can choose the beliefs, values, behaviors, strategies, patterns that work the best for us, that end up comprising that mosaic of who it is we want to be in the world. We can adapt those things. We can learn those strategies. Even if it's too late for us to go back to being 5 years old, we can learn them when we're that young and impressionable. We can use our conscious minds to teach ourselves the things that we wish we had been able to grow up with. And I am absolutely living proof of that. And so are a lot of other people that I've worked with. And if you do want to work with me, like I said, we have that next course coming up starting this Sunday, July 10th. I'm really, really excited. We have some really, really amazing people in the container. I'm always just so grateful and overwhelmed by the caliber of amazing humans that we have in this container nearly every round. It's just really wonderful to see. So go ahead, reach out to me. You know where to find me. If you don't, you can look in the description. And other than that, yeah, just don't believe the hype, y'all. Don't believe it. I think they want to keep us stuck in those boxes. I think they want to keep us stuck in those labels. I think there's a lot of forces out there that would like for all of us here at the common person level to stay sick. But we don't have to. It takes less than you think it does to change those things. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you guys for watching, and hopefully I'll see you soon.